much. My name is KrisAnne Hall. I'm a constitutional attorney, but I am a member of the endangered species version. I am an attorney that actually understands the Constitution, which makes me a little special. I'm right up there with Publius, although she has I'm sure, a much better understanding of things than I do. She's been diligently at this longer than I have, and I turn to her as direction source quite often. I travel across the country and I teach these lessons. I have a 5-hour workshop in which I travel around and teach the Constitution, the history of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, 1 through 10, where they came from, what they mean, how they're supposed to be applied. I don't just teach, your regular enthusiastic patriot groups. I teach middle school, high school students. I teach on college campuses. I teach legislators. I teach sheriff's offices. That's part of it, right? I've taught with Sheriff Mack in his conferences. I teach in churches all over the country. I teach young people, which we sometimes, when we're in our groups, we become a little insulated and believe that the young people don't care because they don't come to these meetings. But that's simply not the truth. As a matter of fact, I spent an entire week, 2 weeks ago, teaching in Chicago, Illinois.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and then last week I was teaching in Missouri. We taught 9 meetings in 4 days. And in one of those meetings, over 1/3 of the attendees were under the age of 20. So they got to hear this lesson that you're going to get today. We're also going to be doing a rally tomorrow. Where is that? In Faith. Right?
Yes.
Right. So we'll be doing a rally tomorrow, which is going to be much different than this, obviously, because rallies are to encourage the troops. And so that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow. Sheriff Mack will be there, and Wild Bill for America will be there. How many of you heard of Wild Bill? He's really awesome too. So I'm very pleased to be able to have the opportunity to do these things. I was happy doing the job I was doing before this. I was a prosecutor for the state of Florida. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do. It was my white hat job. When I was in law school, I never once did an interview with any law firm because I knew exactly where I was going to go and I knew exactly why I wanted to go there. But when I became interested, as it were, in the Constitution and then fell head over heels in love with the framers of our country, which, by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Okay? The Bible teaches me that there is no love greater than a man has that gives his life for his brother. And that's what they did for us. And so when I started learning what I was learning through them about the Constitution, I started to realize that my constitutional law class doesn't teach Constitution. That's one thing that we need to understand. Our lawyers are not learning the Constitution in law school. They're learning constitutional law. They're learning that men and women in black robes know more about the Constitution than the men who wrote it. And then after all, the men who wrote it are dead and the documents they wrote are irrelevant anyway. So what we do is we end up getting these legal minds pooling their ignorance about something that should be the foundation of who we are. And so I started to teach. I taught at our local middle school. The Republican Executive Committee had me come and teach in our little town. I started teaching in our neighboring communities. I was even invited to speak on our local talk show about the unconstitutional nature of the Affordable Care Act. Right after I did my radio appearance, my boss sent me an email, told me that I had to stop associating with right-wing fringe groups. You know, those middle schoolers, right? And that I couldn't teach the Constitution the way I was teaching it because it was an ethical conflict of interest to work for the government and teach that the government should be limited. And then he told me that I had a decision to make. I could continue my teaching, which, by the way, I was doing on my free time, or I could work for him. Now, I'd also practiced First Amendment law for 2 years for a private firm, so I was pretty sure that I was on solid ground doing what I was doing. So I wrote him back an email trying to explain to him this whole crazy First Amendment thing. And his response was very simple. I don't care. He said, that being said, you continue to do what you're doing or you work for me. He said, carry my badge, by the way. Apparently he forgot who gave him that badge. When it was all said and done, he would remember very quickly. But you see, my husband and I prayed really hard about this because this was not an easy decision for us to give up a job like that. And we realized that I've been teaching several thousand people by that time, that our framers said life, fortune, sacred honor. It wasn't rhetoric for them, it was lifestyle for them. And that you and I, whether we want to admit it or not, have done absolutely nothing to secure the liberty to sit in this room. That has been done by the men and women who came before us, because the truth of liberty is this. Liberty is a gift that we have to pay forward.
Amen.
And so here, what do? I've been teaching people the necessity that, that history repeats, and we're going to be seeing a day, much like our framers did, where we're going to have to make that personal commitment. How would it be after telling everybody that I spoke to about this, and then having the decision come to me and say, well, this sacrifice is too great for my family. I wasn't talking about me. And so we made the decision to step out by faith. And so I told my boss, I understand. I respect your ability to have your own opinion, no matter how erroneous it may be. But I will not stop teaching. And I won't quit. He said, okay, then you're fired. So that was June of 2010. And we've been doing this ever since. I told you the audiences that I teach, I average about 265 trainings in 22 states every single year. Now, I don't take that applause as accolade for me. I take that applause as encouragement for the message and then the people that we're reaching out to. Because you see, we have a mission. We all should have a united mission to support the Constitution of the United States. Because that is the very foundation of who we are. But not only that, the entire purpose of the Constitution of the United States, as it says in the preamble, is to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And if we are supporting something that goes contrary to the Constitution, that means we are supporting something that goes contrary to liberty. And that should be contrary to our nature. And so what we're going to talk about today is the constitutional role and duty of the state and local governments. This is a lesson that I designed because I had a legislator in Utah contact me. His name is Curtis Otis. And KrisAnne, I heard you speak with Sheriff Richard Mack at Richard Mack's National Conference for the Constitutional Sheriff Peace Officer Association, and I want you to come teach our legislators. And so he arranged a meeting for the Conservative Caucus of the Utah House of Legislators. They had some senators there. We had the Attorney General for the state of Utah there. And I created this lesson for them. Back then it was titled The Constitutional Role of the State Legislature. But since then I've been able to teach so many, and I've come to realize realize that this is not reserved to the state legislators. This is the role of every single elected office who takes an oath to support the Constitution of the United States.
Hear, hear.
And so many of the things that we talk about in these slides, we'll be talking about the state legislators, but I want you to keep in mind that although the slide might talk about state legislators, this is the job and the role of every single person who takes that oath. Because if they're an oath taker, crazy me, I think they ought to be an oath keeper.
Hear, 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 hear.
And how do you keep an oath when you have no idea what it means?
Right.
See, here's the thing. I believe that there are people all over this country destroying the foundation of who we are, transmuting the very nature of our Constitution because they are wicked. Because they have been brainwashed with Marxist progressive doctrine. They have believed that fundamentally transforming who we are is what we need to do. And in that very principle is the seed of wickedness. But I also believe that there are men and women in this country, all the way down to your school board, all the way up to the President of the United States, who are destroying the Constitution, the foundation of who we are, because they're ignorant. Do you see that? There are people that are fundamentally ignorant about what the Constitution means and their duty to it. But here is my question. At the end of the day, what difference does it make? Whether they are wicked or ignorant, the consequences are exactly the same. But here's the cold, hard truth. Because you see, I know what we hear on television all the time, but the truth is not fair and balanced. And sometimes when you speak truth, it stings a bit. We, the people, are not a reflection of our government. Our government is a reflection of we, the people. Are you sick and tired of an unconstitutional government? Then we got to stop being an unconstitutional people. Are you sick and tired of a fundamentally ignorant government? Then we got to stop being a fundamentally ignorant people. Because we forget, we select these people. We have chosen them. They weren't appointed on us. We chose them. And the reason we choose who we choose, I believe, is because the Marxists started taking over our education system in 1885, and we simply do not understand the job qualification necessary to fulfill the oath. And we keep choosing the wrong people. We choose carpenters to conduct brain surgery because, after all, they know how to cut things, so they should be good. Once we elect them and we call them senator, or we call them representative, or we call them president, some divine dove flies down, lands on their shoulders, and departs upon them all the knowledge they need. If we're going to do this right, the education has to start here. Has to start grassroots. Do you think the federal government is crazy out of control?
Yes.
Are you sick and tired of the office of the president writing law, overturning law, and setting aside law, and doing whatever they please in the form of regulation? Okay, that's not loud enough because I don't think you're really singing. Can I let you know something? You don't have a president problem. You have a Congress problem. The president doing all those things is not an indication that the office of the president is out of control. It's an indication that your Congress is out of control. Because it's the Congress's job, delegated authority, to keep that executive branch in its right position. And because our Congress has failed to exercise the authority and the duty under it, vested in them under Article 2, Section 7, the impeachment clause, and Article 2, Section 4, through the impeachment clause, and Article 1, Section 7, through the power of the purse, they have become complicit in everything that the president does. These dog and pony shows they call congressional hearings, where they do absolutely nothing but set up a stage so that we can cheer on some loudmouths, right? Oh, I like that guy. He really stuck it to him. Well, what good is it if all he does is talk, 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 and nothing ever happens? What about the Supreme Court? There's no hope in the Supreme Court, is there?
Black robes.
I mean, after all, this is the Supreme Court that said health care is a power that's rightly wielded by the federal government, and the last time I checked, that's not on the list. But let us not forget that this is also the Supreme Court that said that the federal government can regulate carbon emissions. Thank you, Justice Scalia, for that opinion. Never once addressing the fact that the EPA does not even constitutionally exist. They're not on the list. We have got to start figuring out the answers to controlling federal government is not in the federal government. Our hope is lost in them. The federal government is a huge distraction, a fatal attraction, and a very abusive love affair with the people of America. We need to ignore the federal government for at least 6 years. Nothing is going to change in 6 years in Washington, D.C., even if we ignore them, because you know what? They've been ignoring us for a lot longer than that. And they still go about their business every way they want to do it, regardless of what we say. So here's what I think. We should ignore the federal government for 6 solid years and dump every dollar we would put in a federal election, every minute we would put into a federal election, and dump that into a school board, a county commission, a city council, a sheriff. Because you get a constitutionally minded school board and Common Core won't even be an issue for you. You get a constitutionally minded city council, county commission, and you won't even know what ICLEI means, and Agenda 21 will be something you laugh at everybody else dealing with.
Oh, yeah.
You get a constitutional sheriff, and you don't care what the state or the feds are doing, because the constitutional sheriff knows his duty number 1 is to the Constitution and the liberty of the people, and he doesn't give a flip what anybody else says. And in 4 years of that mentality, you will have created a crucible of government-trained, constitutionally minded people that you can send to your state capital. And once you get a state government that's constitutionally minded, all your federal troubles are over. And then in 6 years, no matter what the federal government has done over the last 6 when they were ignoring you and you were ignoring them, it won't matter because you will now be able to put them completely under control. If there's going to be one consequence in that 6 years of you ignoring them, they might start to understand who they work for. and stop running around like princes and princesses instead of employees. But that education must begin with us. Do you get discouraged when you're watching the news or listening to the radio or reading something on the internet and all you hear are these talking heads of people pointing fingers and screaming and ranting and raving and laying blame? You get sick and tired of that? Do you sometimes get overwhelmed by the level of corruption that you see? I guess not, huh?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you know what I think one of the greatest afflictions, one of the greatest obstacles to Americans in fixing government today is? We think this is a brave new world. We think that everything that we are experiencing is brand new. That nobody has ever gone through this before, and since, we're technologically advanced, we must be intellectually superior. All this stuff is brand new, so we've got to get our think tanks together and figure out what's going wrong so we can roll up our sleeves and figure out how to fix it. How many of you heard of a guy named Solomon? He said, there is nothing new under the sun. Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Both of those men are telling us, look, history always repeats. You don't need to know your future. To know your future, you don't need to go to a psychic. All you got to do is study your history, because human nature never changes and history always repeats. But those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And you wonder why one of the major roles of Marxist progressive education is to reinvent history.
Teach social studies.
So that you can repeat the mistakes. Because they know if you know true history, you will do something very important. You'll repeat the good stuff instead. So what we're going to do today is, instead of sitting around calling out names and getting angry, instead of laying blame, see, I have this motto, losers point fingers, winners find solutions. We are going to talk about the solutions, not my solutions. My solutions would be a little bit different than this, okay? We're going to talk about the solutions that our framers put into place, the designed plan for when our government did this. See, we don't realize, because we don't teach proper history, that our framers expected this day might come. What was that famous conversation between the woman and Benjamin Franklin? What kind of government did you give us, Mr. Franklin? A republic, if you can keep it. They knew the natural progression of human nature and the way government interacts with that. And they expected that if we did not do the job of a vigilant, diligent citizen, this is where we would be. Our framers were very thorough. And they wanted to make sure that everything that they sacrificed for would not be lost when we became pacified in prosperity and lazy in luxury. So, we are going to talk about the constitutional role and duty of every oath taker. This is the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Virginia from 1799. Basically, the Virginia legislators of 1799, and they are going to give us the best job description of your oath takers. Dear, that bottle of water right there, can you bring that to me, please? Thank you. I used up all of my inner humidity teaching 9 lessons in 4 days. So you'll have to excuse me while I drink my water every now and again. So, first they're going to tell us is that We are good legislators. Why? Because we're unwilling to shrink from our representative responsibilities. Wouldn't you love to have someone that you have put into office who is concerned, honestly concerned about their representative responsibilities rather than their re-election or their own personal gain? Okay. Unwilling to shrink from our representative responsibilities. And what is job responsibility number 1? To be the guardians of the state's sovereignty. Job description number 1 of your state legislators or any oath taker is not job creation. It is not economic improvement. It is not even creating educational standards. Job description number 1 is to be the guardians of the state's sovereignty. Why? Because they're acting under the oath, I will support the Constitution of the United States. And before we leave here this afternoon, you will be assured that you cannot guard the Constitution of the United States if you are not guarding the sovereignty of the state. They are dependent upon each other. Now, they say, look, we understand that there's a responsibility in guarding the sovereignty of the state and keeping our oath to warn you of any federal encroachment that may come your way. Novel idea, huh? Your legislators in your states are supposed to be warning you of encroachments, not competing for them. Now, they're trying to explain to us here, warning you and doing our job to secure the sovereignty of the state may not be very easy because, you see, our people will be duped by these encroachments. They'll be clothed with the pretext of necessity. Because, you see, we must have national health care. If we don't have national health care, we're all going to die. I got bad news for you. We're all going to die. The minute you were born, you were working towards your death. Okay, I know that sounds really pessimistic, but that's truly the way it is, right? National health care just allows the federal government to decide who, when, where, and how you die.
Hear, hear.
But that sounds really good, though, that pretext of necessity. They said not only will it be clothed in the pretext of necessity, but it may be disguised by arguments of expediency. Because you know, we have to pass the bill so we can read the bill because we're all going to die. I'll remind you, this was written in 1799, not 1999. Why? Because there is nothing new under the sun. Human nature never changes. We are not a brave new world. We are just simply repeating the same history that's been repeated for centuries. We just do it with different toys. So, when studying out this issue, we need to get back to some basics. And I mean real basics, ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. I think that Americans, because we think we're so much smarter, take a lot of the simple things for granted. And sometimes we have to get back to the little bitty basics and say them out loud so the light bulbs will turn on. And so the first question that I want to ask you is, which came first? The states or the federal government? Obviously, right? No brainer. But you see, let's stop and think about that. How did the states come about? What was the chronological events of their creation? How does the state versus the federal creation all work out? Well, you know, we're often taught in school that the colonies became independent from Great Britain as a result of the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. That is not true. We did not become independent from Great Britain because a bunch of rich white guys wanted to become rogue anarchists and avoid paying their fair share of taxes. Be careful, that's what your Common Core school books are teaching. I've read that myself. We became independent from Great Britain on July 2nd, 1776. Because you see, a man named Richard Henry Lee, who was a representative to the people of Virginia, put before the Continental Congress the Lee Resolution, a 3-step process to declaring independence from Great Britain. And on July 2nd, 1776, the Lee Resolution was brought to the Continental Congress floor. It was debated, voted, and ratified into law on July 2nd, 1776. Our independence was not a bunch of rogue anarchists acting in a lawless manner. Our independence was the result of a legislatively debated, legally passed into law act, and is just as legally binding as anything our Congress does today that's constitutional. Which means this: the states existed prior to the Declaration of Independence by 2 days. Which also means, chronologically speaking, the states existed prior to the Articles of Confederation. Now, the interesting thing about the Articles of Confederations is that our framers were so afraid that they would accidentally, without wanting to, create a central government too large. So they ended up making one too small. The Articles of Confederation created a central government that was so small it could not perform the functions it was tasked to do. So we dissolve, right here, we're dissolving the Articles of Confederation. Prior to the Declaration of Independence, and even at the Declaration of Independence, is there any mention of the executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch? No. Those don't exist until the Articles of Confederation. But now remember, we're going to dissolve the Articles of Confederation, which means we are legally dissolving any form of executive, legislative, or judicial. And at the point that we dissolve our executive, legislative, and judicial, what governments are left? The states. Which also means our states are the only governments that exist prior to the Constitution, which we call the more perfect union because it was more perfect than the first one. So, now that we understand this chronology, what is a state? Well, in order to understand what a state is, because we got to get back to some basics here. What is a state? We're going to go to the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is where we publish and declare what we did on July 2nd, and the very language of this is the last paragraph to the Declaration of Independence, the very language in this text, in many places, is verbatim from the Lee Resolution. And so in this last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, we are going to learn the definition and the power of the states. We therefore, the what? Representatives of the United States. Now I want you to look at this very closely. This is a lowercase u. Okay? It is not a proper noun. This is an adjective. What they're saying is, in these states, we are united in this plan. So in these states, being united in this plan, acting in the General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of who? The people. This is our first clue that we are no longer a kingdom. Because if we had been a kingdom, that would have to say by the authority of the king and the crown. But because we are not a kingdom, we are a republic, the authority comes from the people. Remember, the first part of the Declaration of Independence says that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. And now we're reasserting it in the final paragraph. By the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare, we didn't do it, we're publishing and declaring what we already did, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. The representatives of the people, this is not done by popular vote, done through representation, have now done something very important. We have changed from colonies to states, which must mean there's a difference between a colony and a state, right? And the difference between a colony and a state is this. Colonies are not free and independent. Colonies have no freedom, they have no independence, colonies have no sovereignty, because colonies can do nothing unless the central government says so, and colonies must do everything the central government tells them to do. A colony cannot argue with the central government, and a colony cannot disagree, and a colony cannot act independent of the central government. But we are not colonies anymore, they're telling us. We are states, and we are now free and independent. But what is a state? We know that's free and independent. We know the words free and independent can be combined in one word, sovereign. But what does that mean, really? Well, continuing with the last paragraph, we left off with this statement, so this is a continuation. There is nothing left out here. Free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the what?
States of Great Britain.
What is that again? States of Great Britain. That word state is not just synonymous with North Carolina, Virginia, or Rhode Island. That word state is synonymous with Great Britain. It's synonymous with Spain. It is synonymous with Germany. That word state means free and independent, sovereign country. Not a colony, not a subset of a larger government, but free and independent country. How do we know that? Not only is it there, synonymous with Great Britain, but now they're going to tell us the power our states hold. They have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do what? All other acts and things which independent states like Great Britain, France, and Spain may have right to. This is the power that belongs to government. Now, this is the Declaration of Independence. Could they be referring to the executive branch here? The legislative branch? The judicial branch? Could they even be referring to the central government as a whole? No! Because the only governments that exist are the states. And they exist not as a whole together, but as independent states, each and every one of them in their independence holds this power. This is the power of Rhode Island. This is the power of North Carolina. This is the power of Virginia as they were created. Now we know a state is free and independent, it is sovereign. We know the word state is synonymous with country, sovereign country. We know the power that all our states hold. We need to now understand what is the Constitution. How does the Constitution play in all of this? Very specifically now, the Constitution is a contract. It is a legally binding contract. Now, to be technically correct, and how our framers call it all the time, it is a compact. But the use of that word compact over contract even reaffirms what I've just told you here. Because a contract is an agreement between people. A compact is an agreement between sovereign governments. Since it's called the compact, it is an agreement between sovereign governments. So if our Constitution is an agreement between sovereign governments, what were the only sovereign governments that were in existence at the time the Constitutional Compact was being created? The states. So the Constitution must be and can only be an agreement between the sovereign countries we called the 13 states. It is a contract which created the central government. Now I want to teach you some contract law terms just so you can understand what we're talking about as we read the framers down the road. Very basically, there are two parts to a contract. There are parties to the contract and there are products of the contract. The parties of the contract are the people who wrote it. The product of the contract is what was created from its writing. We know that the compact was created by who? The states. So they must be the parties. We know the Constitution created the central government, which means the central government must be the product. In knowing this, we must understand that the sovereignty of the states is key to the creation of the contract. It is key to the maintenance of the contract. Because you cannot legally contract if you are not sovereign. That is my 8-year-old son back there. His name is Colton. My son cannot engage in a legal contract because he's only 8. And in the eyes of the law, he is not sovereign. He is subject to his parents. You must be sovereign in the eyes of the law to create a contract, which is more evidence of the sovereign nature of our states, because if they had not been sovereign, they could not have created a legally binding contract. The sovereignty of the states is key to saying that the states are the creators of the central government. They enumerated its specific powers. They created a limited government, and then, this is a very important word, reserved all other powers to themselves. So now we know what the states are. They are sovereign countries with all the power of France, Spain, and Great Britain. They are the creators of the compact, and they are the creators of the central government. They delegated limited and defined powers to the central government and reserved all other powers to themselves. Now we need to understand the distribution of power. What power went where? This is James Madison. We refer to James Madison even today in our progressive education system as the father of the Constitution. So, the father of the Constitution says in 1792, which, by the way, we need to recognize this is not the first time we have been dealing with a central government that's trying to leap outside of its box. They were already trying to do that in 1792. There was legislation on the House floor to set up a law so that the central government could protect our coasts from codfish poaching. Specifically, the poaching of our codfish by the British government. I don't know if you realize this or remember this from your history lessons, After our first war for independence, the British government did not recognize our independence. They still kept acting like we were still colonies. That's why we had to have the War of 1812, which our framers would call the Second War for Independence, when Great Britain finally got it. Now, between 1812 and the First War, Great Britain's still acting like we're theirs, and they're coming over here and they're decimating our cod fishing industry. So we go into Congress, in a session of Congress, to establish the legal means by which the federal government can protect our coasts from this foreign poaching. And imagine this. They've got this bill to protect the borders, and somebody's trying to shove pork in it. While we're protecting our borders, why don't we subsidize the cod fishing industry until they can get back on their feet? Go back and read this if you want to look into it. It's James Madison on the cod fishery bill, or you can go to my website. You'll see a link to it later. It's KrisAnneHall.com, and put into my search engine general welfare. Because James Madison gives the best description of the purpose of the general welfare clause, the necessary proper clause, the tax and spending clause, and the commerce clauses in this legal argument, where he says the central government has no authority to subsidize industries. And then says if we allow them to do that, we will transmute the very nature of the limited government we design. Because he says, look, I have always conceived. I believe those who propose the Constitution conceive it is still more fully known and more material to observe. Look, more material to observe that those who ratified the Constitution conceived. Why? Because when you want to know what the contract means, the most relevant opinion belongs to those who wrote it.
Amen.
The most legally relevant as well. Conceive that this is not an indefinite government, but a limited government tied down to specific powers. What powers? What are those specific powers? Well, James Madison is going to tell us in Federalist Papers 45 the real lesson we need to learn on the distribution of power. This is Federalist 45. He says, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. We have created a box, a few and defined box. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. Now, we know we're delegating power to the feds through the Constitution. Who's doing the delegating? Well, we know here, if the power remains in all these other powers remain means they must have all started there, right? Using the word remain implies they started there, so we know even more evidence that it is the states that created the central government, because they are the ones who are delegating the power. But once we know the power that's being delegated, we can then no longer question where it comes from. Because Madison tells us the former, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the feds, will be exercised principally on external objects. External objects is founders speak for foreign affairs. The whole reason, let me put this way, the sole reason we created the central government was to be an agent on behalf of the states in foreign affairs. We didn't need a central government to govern ourselves. We had already delegated all that authority through the Lee Resolution. But if we're going to form a union for our common defense, for our general welfare, then we need to have a way to speak. What good would it be to form a union if in order to make a trade treaty with France, France had to make 13 different treaties with 13 different conditions and 13 possibly different currencies. There's no point in forming a union in that way. Or if we formed a union for our common defense and we had to go to war, but we had to declare war 13 different times in 13 different ways and have 13 different peace treaties. That makes no sense whatsoever. So in forming the union, in order to be an efficiently and properly operating union, we had to have a common voice for foreign affairs. The central government is the only power. No power on that list is to be used outside the context necessary for foreign affairs. That's why Madison made this short list. All the powers on the list spring from this short list: war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Those are the only powers that were ever delegated to the central government. Because Madison tells us very clearly, as he concludes this thought in 45, the powers reserved to the several states, this is a very important word, reserved to the several states, will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the states. Is healthcare, war, peace, negotiation, or foreign commerce? No, but it's definitely the ordinary course of affairs in the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, right? Is land management, war, peace, negotiation, or foreign affairs? Is education, war, peace, negotiation, or foreign affairs? No. Then we can clearly see that those were powers that were what? Reserved to the states. War, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce, external affairs is all we ever delegated to the feds. Everything else belongs to the states. Does that mean that there's some power floating around in the ether waiting for somebody to pick it up? No, it's either this or everything else. Which means if the federal government is doing more than this, then they have to steal that power from where? Federal theft. Thomas Jefferson tells us very specifically just that principle. Whenever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. Let me ask you a question. If I steal your car, do I have the authority to use it? Do I have the authority to sell your car if I've stolen it from you? If I sell your stolen car, is that sale have any legal force behind it? No. The act of selling that stolen car is an illegal act, which means it has no authority, it is void and of no force. If the federal government is stealing power from the states, they have no authority to use it. And if they use it because it is stolen, it has no legal force. It is void on its face because it's stolen. Now, 1830. We are back again dealing with a central government that is leaping out of its box. Imagine that. If you want to know about this bit of history, you need to do a search on the Great Debate of 1830. Do a little research on the Great Debate of 1830. You're going to find the circumstances in that time eerily familiar. And you'll also find out about something very important in our history. John Calhoun, dealing with the central government trying to leap outside its confined box, says, "The doctrine which denies to the states the right of protecting their reserved powers." Calhoun's implying there's a right to protect what's reserved to them. So let's think about this. This this chair down here on the end, let's just pretend it has a sign on it that says, reserved for KrisAnne Hall. Reserved for me. If someone else sits in that chair, what do I have the authority to do? Kick him out, right? Don't I have a right to kick him out of my chair?
Yep.
I'm certainly not going to resort to violence first, I'm going to ask them to leave first. Now, I have the authority to tell them to go because the chair is reserved to me. If the chair says reserved to KrisAnne Hall, someone else sits in the chair, and I don't have the authority to make them go, is the chair really reserved to me? That was like a friendly suggestion, right? Because you see, having something reserved to you indicates you have authority over that thing. And indicates that you have not only authority over that thing, you have the authority to secure that thing to yourself so nobody else can have it. Reserved powers. He says the doctrine which denies the states to their right to protect their reserved chair would vest in the general government the right of determining exclusively and finally their own powers. You see, if the states can't protect those all other powers reserved to them, then what is the limit on the federal government? They can do whatever they want. They can use whatever power they want. Calhoun says if that's the case, that's incompatible with the sovereignty of the states. Because if the states can't protect their power and they're simply left to do whatever the feds say they have to do, or be left with other power, whatever power the feds say they can have, are they sovereign? They're taking orders from the feds then, right? And then we're not sovereign states, we're colonies once again. But he says not only is this doctrine of allowing the feds to do whatever they want and the states not having the authority to guard what is reserved to them, not only is that incompatible with the sovereignty of the states, it's incompatible with the Constitution itself. Because the Constitution created a limited and defined government with delegated powers, reserving all the other powers to themselves. You can't have them doing whatever they want and be compatible with that doctrine. Not only that, what did we learn about contracts and sovereigns? If the states are colonies, they cannot have created a compact. They must be sovereign to have engaged in a contractual agreement. And if they're not sovereign, then the contract is void. The federal government doesn't exist in its contracted manner. And what we're left with is a ruling and reigning government, a kingdom over us. Sovereignty is the key to maintaining liberty, because sovereignty is the key to maintaining the federal government in its limited and defined box. There is a designed solution. Our framers anticipated the day when the federal government might leap out of its box, when we might become pacified in prosperity, lazy in luxury. James Madison says, in the case of deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted, who? The states have the right. Why? Because it's reserved to them. But look, Madison's going to take it a step further. They not only have the right to protect what's been reserved to them, they have the duty to do it. Why? Because remember back in the Declaration we pointed out that it was the authority of the people that delegated all this power to the states. And they have a duty to keep the federal government in its limited box because the people have entrusted them with securing the blessings of liberty. They are duty-bound to interpose. What is that interposition? That's the state stepping up and saying, hey, that chair is reserved to us. You don't have any authority to sit in it. And any time you sit in it and use it, your acts are void and of no force. We are going to now step am in front of you to make sure that you are within your limited box so that we can be sure to secure the rights and the liberties of the people. Thomas Jefferson called this nullification. Now, since we're here under a rightful remedy assembly, which I'm sure came from this phrase right here, right? Imagine that. I'm also pretty sure that the majority of you have heard of this word nullification in this context. Am I right? Well, I don't know if you've ever tried personally to teach other people about this application of nullification. So if you have not, let me just give you a word of warning. Okay? I am an amateur historian. I do not have the confidence in myself to read other people's history books, because I've come to understand that our history over the last 100 years has become infested with psychologists and philosophers.
Yes, it has.
People who are more concerned about history, how it makes us feel, than the fact that these events actually happened on this day. So I restrict my study in history to original source documents. And I want to suggest to you that if you are going to engage in historical studies, that's what you need to do. You need to either, number one, engage in historical studies through original source documents, or through books who always cite in their text to original source texts. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to check out what they're saying being really true. I don't know if you realize this or not, but there are thousands of quotes floating around on the internet attributed to our framers of things they never said. Thomas Jefferson never said, "The price of liberty is eternal vigilance." He never said that. That was a man by the name of John Philpott Curran, who said in 1790 during a gubernatorial election in Dublin, Ireland, he said, "It is the common fate of the indolent to see their rights stolen by the active. The condition upon which God grants liberty to man is eternal vigilance, and if that condition is broken, servitude is his punishment and the immediate indication of his guilt." So, before you quote a founder, go back to the original source just so you know you got it right. And I want to tell you that I came across this understanding of nullification through original source documents. So my first thought was this: woo! I just had to do that to wake you up. No, I was really, really excited. I mean, seriously, I thought, this is simple. This is so simple. Not only is it just common sense, but it's legally sound. It's sound in law, it's sound in contract law, and it conforms with the design solution of our framers. Why isn't everybody doing this? It is very simple. Let me make clear about something. It is simple. It is not easy. There's a difference. So in my excitement, I trotted up to my state capitol. They were having a Senate Judiciary Committee meeting on the establishment of the state exchanges for the Health Care Act. I signed up to have my 3 minutes. And I was very fortunate because it was a hotly contested meeting. It was packed out of people, and when the people saw me there, through Robert's rules, they were then giving me all their time. So when I stood up there, I had like 90 minutes. Now, I didn't take 90 minutes, wasn't going to take 90 minutes, but let me tell you what, the minutes that I took, our senators were not very happy about. Very interesting meeting. It's actually online. You can read it. It was like guards coming in and stuff at some point. So the story, though, that's important is what happened after that meeting. Our Senate president at that time was a man named Don Gates. Now, he didn't attend the meeting. He came in afterwards to shake hands and kiss babies. And so somebody introduced me to him. Oh, you need to go meet Don Gates. He calls himself a constitutional historian. He's a big history buff, and he's a conservative Republican. And I'm like, yeah, that's my in. He's the Senate president. And so I go up to him, I shake his hand, I said, Mr. Gates, it's a pleasure to meet you. He said, oh, yes, Miss Hall, it's good to meet you too. Really, Mr. Gates? Because I'm hoping we can see more of each other. Oh, yes, Miss Hall, that would be fantastic. Really, Mr. Gates? Because I would love to come and teach the Senate about nullification. Now, nobody told me this is a dirty word. Okay? See, we fail to acknowledge that our state and local governments have become infested with federal supremacists. These people that believe that there must be a supremacy in power, and that supremacy in power must lie with the federal government, and that since the supremacy clause that says federal law trumps state law, and since the Supreme Court says that, that the federal government is supreme over the states, that we must give in and do whatever the feds say. And federal supremacists are scared to death of nullification. You want to see a grown man run? Say nullification to a federal supremacist. Okay? Now, I found out very quickly Don Gates is a federal supremacist. Because when I said that word nullification to him, it was like he looked at me like I had slapped him in the face with a wet fish. He stepped back from me. Now, I was very pleased to see that Miss Publius is smaller than me. That doesn't happen very often. So I'm not a formidable force, right? So he steps back from me, cocks his hip and says, nullification, huh? I guess the Supreme Court didn't get your memo. I said, my memo? I guess they didn't get Hamilton, Jefferson, or Madison's memo either then, did they? He says, Madison, huh? Been conducting seances? Talked to Madison lately? Now, the thoughts that are running through my head are these. This guy is my employee. Why is he talking to me like this? So right now, my blood pressure is going up, right? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have. It's called the Federalist Papers. Maybe you ought to read them every now and again. Now, at which point Don Gates realizes I'm not backing down, right? So he turns his back on me, starts walking away, waving his hand, mumbling things about dead people in irrelevant documents.
It's because you said a fact.
Now, I don't know about you, but let me tell you something about me. My personal nature, if you haven't figured it out already. All the diplomacy that was allotted to my family was given to my husband. Okay? He's not only a pastor by trade, but that's who he is by form. He can tell people they're all wrong and make them feel good about it, okay? Now, I'm not saying I have an inability to be diplomatic. I just don't think we have time anymore.
Amen. That's right.
And by the very nature of being bold and brassy the way I am, something happens to me when I get in these kind of conflicts. I get tunnel vision. So as far as I'm concerned, Don Gates and I are the only people in the room. And he's walking out the door. Now he's about as far away from me as these three beautiful ladies right here. His back is to me, he's walking out the door, I'm running out of time, so I yell at him. I said, hey, Mr. Gates, I thought you called yourself a constitutional conservative Republican. He spun on his heels and snarled and pointed his finger at me and said, I took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States. I said, well, maybe it's about time you learned something about that document, don't you think? At which point, Don Gates realizes something I don't because of my tunnel vision, right? We are not the only people in the room. As a matter of fact, we have just come from a hotly contested Senate judicial meeting, and there is a whole crowd of people behind me watching this all take place. Some of them reporters with cameras. His entire demeanor changes. "Oh, Miss Hall, I'd be happy to read anything you have to say. Just send me an email." So I did. I wrote a little primer on nullification and I emailed it to him. He sent me back an email in reply, telling me that he thought that I should be shot or hanged for asserting that the states have a power over the federal government. Now, I took a screenshot of his email. You can actually read it on my website because I wanted to make sure that didn't go away. Now, the Huffington Post confronted Don Gates on this email exchange. Don Gates laughed it all off. "Oh, of course, I didn't mean we should go around shooting and hanging people. I just wanted Miss Hall to realize that we could disagree and still remain civil." Civility? What do you suppose would happen if I sat down and penned an email to Don Gates and told him I thought he should be shot or hanged for failing in his duty to preserve our liberty? Who'd be knocking on my door, right? So I just want to remind you, nullification is not an act. Nullification is the result of the federal government's unlawful act to try to wield stolen power. So the key to nullification is not nullification in and of itself. The key to nullification is sovereignty. And so if you want to reach the federal supremacists, you've got to stick with sovereignty. Because you use that word nullification, and these federal supremacists might just want to lynch you. Because they're going to tell you it's not in the Constitution. They're going to tell you, as Don Gates says, the Supreme Court settled that a long time ago. They're going to tell you the Supremacy Clause prohibits it. But our framers said to disallow nullification is an act of tyranny. Why? Because when you disallow the right of the states to protect what is reserved to them, then what you're admitting is the federal government is completely unlimited in its power. And a government that is completely unlimited in its power is a totalitarian kingdom and by its very nature tyrannical. So let's address these issues. And I'm really sorry the sheriff left because he asked a question during his workshop that we're going to answer. It's not in the Constitution, they say. Well, yes, it is. It's in the 9th and 10th Amendments. It's a principle. Just like separation of church and state is in the First Amendment. It's a principle. It doesn't have to be there in verbatim. It's a principle. Interestingly enough, the 9th Amendment is the most important clause in the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights. It is the 9th Amendment that makes us a republic. It's the 9th Amendment that declares that all the rights in the universe belong to the people. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. What they're simply saying is, the reason that we have these rights are because all of them are ours to begin with. All the rights belong to us that are in the universe, whether they're written down or not. And because they're ours, they don't come from the king. And therefore we are not a kingdom, we are a republic. Isn't it a bit coincidental that the 9th Amendment is the most important clause in the entire Constitution of the Bill of Rights, the very clause that makes us a republic and not a kingdom, and probably the least taught in our government schools and the least recognized by our Americans? would a government school not want you to know that you're not a kingdom, but a republic? Now, because, it's a rhetorical one, because all the rights in the universe come from the people, we know through the Lee Resolution that we delegate, we have the right, we have the authority to delegate all this power to the states. And we reserved power to the states because we have that authority to do so. And because we have the authority to do it in the 10th Amendment, working in conjunction with the 9th Amendment, because the 10th Amendment is the second most important clause in the entire Constitution and the Bill of Rights, because it's the 10th Amendment that tells us power is delegated, not surrendered. Delegate and surrender are not synonymous. Surrender means you've permanently given it up. To delegate means a temporary transfer of authority to do a job for me. Temporarily. We know from our history lesson and from our constitutional lesson already that the states delegated authority to the feds, which means the states delegated temporarily an authority to the feds to do a job for them. And when the feds fail to do that authority because it is not surrendered, what can the states do?
Take it back.
Take it back. And we also know, remember James Madison told us in Federalist 45 that powers were reserved to the states? Well, look here, right here in the 10th Amendment. Reserved to the states. Which means they have an authority to protect it for themselves. And if they don't have the authority to protect it for themselves, James Madison is a liar, and so is the Constitution of the United States. Nullification is not an act. Nullification is the result of the federal government's illegal act to steal our power and the natural reaction of the states to reserve it to themselves. The Supreme Court says we can't do that. I'm sure you guys, we're dealing with rightful remedy people, so you know this means Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS. SCOTUS has the final say. James Madison says, no way. I love this quote from James Madison because he gets right to the point and pulls no punches. If the decisions of the judiciary be raised above the authority of the sovereign parties to the Constitution. Who are the sovereign parties to the Constitution?
States.
Isn't that amazing? Madison is explaining that the states are even superior to the judiciary. If the decisions of the judiciary be raised above the authority of the states, dangerous powers not delegated may not only be usurped and executed by other departments, but that the judicial department also may exercise sanction dangerous powers beyond the grant of the Constitution. Like the Supreme Court saying that federal health care is a power rightly wielded by the federal government. See, the judiciary branch is not using that health care power. However, they're sanctioning other branches to do that, which is dangerous. Because you see, anytime the federal government does something it's not delegated to do, it's always dangerous. Because the people always lose liberty. Consequently, the ultimate right of the parties to the Constitution. Who are the parties to the Constitution? The ultimate right of the states to judge whether the compact, which is the compact? The Constitution, has been dangerously violated, must extend to violations by one delegated authority as well as by another, by the judiciary as well as by the executive or the legislative. When we designed the federal government through the Constitution, we designed 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and we can all unanimously agree the judiciary is part of the one federal government, right?
Yes.
Madison is simply saying to us, How does it make any sense at all that we would allow the federal government to determine what its own limits of power are, even if it's just through one part of them? Now, we're going to go back in time just a little bit to Madison again. Now, this is 1789, and Madison is addressing the House of Representatives on the argument on whether we should incorporate the Bill of Rights or not. Now, I don't know if you remember from your history lessons that there was a huge disagreement about whether we should have a Bill of Rights or not. One argument said we must have a Bill of Rights. Because you see, we know how history works, we know how people work. We know that people will become pacified in prosperity, they will become lazy in luxury, they will be comfortable. And that is the moment government is always waiting for. Because the government will come to you and say, "We are so happy you're comfortable. Doesn't it feel awesome to be comfortable? Do you know we can actually help you be comfortable? We can actually help you stay comfortable." You see, if you have all this prosperity and all this stuff, we can help you keep that stuff. See, let us do this thing for you so you just be comfortable doing this. And don't worry about that healthcare thing. Don't let it trouble you. We'll do that for you too. And oh my goodness, we know what trouble kids can be. Don't worry about educating your kids. We can do that for you. You could go off and be soccer mom and softball dad, and you could do karate lessons and piano lessons, and you gotta have mom, dad date night. You can do all those things. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of your kids for you too. And our framers knew that in our comfort, government is waiting for that. Because every time they want to make you more comfortable, they have to have more power to do that. And every time government has more power, you have less liberty. Liberty requires self-sufficiency. And Richard Henry Lee said, we must have this Bill of Rights. Because we must have a sentinel. He called them visible barriers, constantly seen by all. So in those moments of prosperity, in those moments of luxury, when we're feeling all comfortable and lazy, we will have an alarm that goes off anytime, as Patrick Henry would say, the government approaches the jewel of our liberty. The problem is, we have failed to teach our rights for so long. That alarm has been going off for decades. And it's nothing more than a silent alarm. They said we have to have this Bill of Rights. Richard Henry Lee called them for those unavoidable periods of inattentiveness. Now the other side of the argument, do you agree with Richard Henry Lee? You see why we had to have him? Because they knew we were going to fall asleep? We fell asleep, right? Okay. Now the other side of the argument is just as relevant. The other side of the argument says we don't need a Bill of Rights. We have been writing down our rights for the last 700 years. We have these 5 liberty charters. We have pages and pages of rights that we've been writing down, securing rights of the people from the king and limiting kings and governments more and more every time. And if we make a list now, we will definitely have to condense those lists that we've been making over the last 700 years. And in condensing those lists, we will inevitably leave something off. And if we make a list and we put it in writing, we will actually be putting into the hands of the government the very tool to wipe out all our rights. Because the government will say this: that's a really great list. You worked hard to get that list. But look, isn't that interesting? That's not on the list. And since that's not on the list, it must be okay for us to regulate it. But we recognize that there are some things on the list. And we certainly certainly wouldn't want to infringe or abridge on those things that are on the list. Take, for example, that freedom of press thing. We certainly wouldn't want to abridge on your freedom of press. But in order to not, accidentally do it, we have to know what press is. So let us define press so we don't accidentally, abridge it, and then we'll all be clear on the matter. Because we know this is definitely press. This right here. Clearly. Nobody could argue. This has got to be press. But this isn't, not so clear, right? This internet thing. How can internet be press? Because you know what? Thomas Jefferson didn't have Google. Benjamin Franklin didn't have the World Wide Web. So this internet thing, it can't be press, right? So since it's not press, then it must be okay for us to regulate. Alexander Hamilton said there is no way to define a liberty without establishing a way to evade it. Now, James Madison has made a very special promise to the people of Virginia as their delegate. They sent him up there with one purpose, to make sure we had a Bill of Rights. So he feels personally responsible for solving this dilemma. And James Madison is going to tell us why incorporating the Bill of Rights into the Constitution will not be a bad thing and will not be dangerous. He says, if the Bill of Rights, are incorporated into the Constitution, independent tribunals of justice will consider themselves in a peculiar manner the guardians of those rights. The courts will be the guardians of our rights. The courts, will be an impenetrable bulwark against every assumption of power in the legislative or executive. They will be naturally led to resist every encroachment upon the rights expressly stipulated for in the Constitution. He's talking about the Bill of Rights. Madison is saying the courts are going to protect our Bill of Rights. Why would Madison have that kind of confidence in the courts? Because Madison knows something that you now know, which makes you smarter than 95% of the judges that sit on the bench, by the way. Madison knows the Constitution is a compact, a contract. And Madison knows that whenever you interpret a contract, there are rules on how that happens legally. Madison knows, according to the rules of contract law, if you come across a provision down the road, you don't know how it works, or you come across a word you're not quite sure how to define. By the rules of contract law, the courts do not sit around and figure out the meanings on their own. They have to go back to the drafters of the contract. It's a legal term called the meeting of the minds. And every contract lawyer, every judge that deals with contract law issues knows that you want to properly interpret the meaning of the contract, you have to return to the meeting of the minds, to the people who wrote it. Madison's saying, look, if we ever get to that point where we don't know what press is, they won't be able to just make it up. They will have to come back to us. And fortunate as it is, we knew that, so we've been writing down everything we've been doing this whole time. Because you see, they didn't write the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Madison didn't take notes of everything that was going on. They didn't debate back and forth to each other in letters because they were simply, wanting to make a record because they were vain and full of themselves. They were establishing a legal trail so that down the road the people would know exactly what they did and exactly why they did it so they could follow the rules of contract law in the interpretation of the Constitution. Do you know what the irony is in this? The Constitution is the only contract in the United States where the judges and lawyers refuse to apply contract law. They want to tell you, we don't need that meeting of the minds. The Constitution's a living, breathing contract. I want you to go find your living, breathing contract lawyers and tell them, okay, next time we're going to interpret your employment contract that way. How do you think they're going to accept that? They're not. So this is what we need to know. Contract law applies. But we also need to know this is not the end of Madison's comments on this matter. This period is not the end. As a matter of fact, right after this period, James Madison is going to give us the even better security than the courts. Besides the security in the courts, there is a great probability that such a declaration in the federal system would be enforced because the state legislatures will jealously and closely watch the operations of this government and be able to resist with more effect every assumption of power by the feds than any other power on earth can do. And that the greatest opponent to the federal government, can we just say that again? The greatest opponent to the federal government admit the state legislatures to be the sure guardians of our liberties. Your state legislators and any of your oath takers are supposed to be the greatest opponents to the federal government, not their greatest allies. They are supposed to be always in an adversarial relationship to guard their powers, to guard the sovereignty of the states, not their greatest cheerleaders and not their greatest fund spenders. They are the sure guardians of your liberty. The Supremacy Clause prohibits it. I love this one. This is the easiest one to defeat. We're going to get through this one really quick because it's just simply a matter of grammar. Alexander Hamilton tells us in Federalist Papers 78, no legislative act contrary to the Constitution can be valid. I don't think you can get simpler than that, right? I understand we live in a society where the government likes to redefine the meaning of the word is. But I'm sure in this room we can still agree that no means no. No legislative act contrary to the Constitution can be valid. Hamilton says, if you allow legislative acts contrary to the Constitution to be valid, you are affirming that the deputy is greater than his principal and the servant is above his master. Did you catch that relationship there, that context and relationship? The deputy, the feds, will be greater than their principal, the states. The servant, the feds, will be above his master, the states. And when that happens, you are setting yourself up for the ultimate consequence. What is that? The representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves. When was the last time you went and tried to talk to one of your federal representatives and felt like he knew he was your employee? Of course not. They treat you like they're inferiors. But because we have allowed legislative acts contrary to the Constitution to be valid for way too long. Supremacy Clause. Very simple. We have two clauses that we're going to deal with here. This Constitution, comma, and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, semicolon. Now this ... is the language about treaties. If you want to know why the UN Arms Treaty is not a lawful act and is void of all force, if you want to know why the Land Sea Treaty is not a lawful act and is void of all force, if you want to know why probably 99.9% of every treaty we've made with the United Nations is unlawful and void of no force, go to my website, in the search engine, just put the term treaty, and I will explain this in the context of treaties. But we're not talking about treaties today, we're talking about the laws of the United States. So, in order to really understand the power of these statements, we're going to break this down grammatically. This Constitution, comma, because that comma is there, you can finish this sentence by saying, shall be the supreme law of the land. This is an independent clause here. This Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. You can also take the next clause and read, the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land. Those are both grammatically correct, they're both factually correct. But when we read it like that, it brings something out right there in front of our face. This Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. There is no qualifier there. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, period. Nothing else is necessary. However, the laws of the United States, the things that Congress does, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. The only way the laws that the federal government make are the supreme law of the land is when they meet this qualifier. They must be made in pursuance to the Constitution. You cannot have the Constitution be the supreme law of the land without a qualifier, and the federal laws the supreme law of the land without a qualifier. You establish a paradox. Because then you can create a situation where Congress can make a law that's the supreme law of the land that is contrary to the Constitution. Which means, guess what? The Constitution is no longer the supreme law of the land. I got really good news for you. The Constitution's not a liar. There's no paradox created, because the only way laws made by the United States are supreme law is if they're match up with the Constitution. You know what that means? If it's not on the list, it is contrary to the Constitution, and it cannot be the supreme law of the land. And that's exactly what Hamilton told us. No legislative act contrary to the Constitution can be valid. And Jefferson told us that any power that is wielded by the government that has not been delegated is unauthoritative, void, and of no force. The states don't have to do anything. The very act of the exercise of stolen power nullifies that power. The states just have to wake up to the reality and protect their ownership. If the federal government is not defined by the Constitution, why do we have a Constitution? Why didn't we just let George Washington be king, like some people wanted him to, just go with the kingdom thing, and then, worked with it as long as we could, and then fixed it when it didn't work? The genius of our framers was not declaring independence from Great Britain. The genius of our framers was declaring independence from kings forever. They figured out over the last 700 years that negotiating with kings only lasts as long as you hold the sword to his throat. And the minute the sword's gone, kings go back to being kings and people going back to be servants. The federal government, if the federal government is not limited in power by the Constitution, then what is its limit? What is the limit of the federal government if it's not limited by the Constitution? Well, either its own power, which is no limit at all, or the states. You see, when the states are defending their reserved power, they're actually defending the republic. Somebody's going to try to tell you nullification is the equivalent of secession. No, nullification is defending the republic. Secession is the admittance that the republic is already dead. Because if the states don't protect their reserved power, then we are not a republic of states. We are a kingdom of subordinate colonies. Good news! Nullification is not a political theory. I had somebody tell me that, KrisAnne, nullification is just a political theory. It's nothing more than political rhetoric. Really? Well, that rhetoric's in action in over 200 pieces of legislation in the United States right now. That rhetoric made Eric Holder mad at the entire state of Kansas. That rhetoric is nullifying gun laws. That rhetoric is nullifying marijuana laws. That rhetoric is nullifying the Defense of Marriage Act. That rhetoric is nullifying Common Core and NDAA and the Patriot Act in over 200 pieces of legislation. And this is my tracking source, so I thought I'd share it with you. You guys know the TAC, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I figured you probably did. I don't know. Do you know this? that the Supreme Court actually supports nullification? In the Affordable Care Act case that went before Justice Roberts said he supported nullification. Here's what he said. We look to the states to defend their prerogatives by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to the federal blandishments when they do not want to embrace the federal policies as their own. Justice Roberts said, states are separate and independent sovereigns, and sometimes they gotta act like it. Woo! And I said, amen!
Then he voted.
Sometimes you gotta act like it. And that means you gotta declare the federal power null and void. This is one of the last letters Alexander Hamilton wrote before the ratification of the Constitution. And when you read this whole letter, you can tingling feel Hamilton's frustration. He's like, oh, all right, let's go over this one more time. You guys know how that feels when you talk to the Convention of States people, right? Let's go over this one more time. Is it not better, I ask, to suffer a few present inconveniences than to put yourselves in the way of losing everything that's precious? Listen to this. If you go to your state legislators and you say, look, we are sovereign and independent. We are the masters of the federal government. We are the creators of this federal government. And we're sick and tired of acting like subjects. We want you to deny these federal encroachments. We want you to get rid of federal control. We want you to kick out the EPA. We want you to kick out the Department of Education, the Department of Energy. We want you to get rid of all these federal entities turning us into colonies. And we want you to do it now. The first thing that's going to come out of your representative's mouth is, well, how will we run our schools without their funding? How will we have proper health care without their funding and their regulations? How will we maintain our roads without their funding? Do you know what they're telling you? It's just too inconvenient for us to do anything about it right now.
Here, here.
Hamilton says, your lives, health care, are at stake. Your property, the EPA, the IRS, the Bureau of Land Management. Your religion, 501c3, health care, IRS. He says they're all at stake. I do my duty. I warn you of your danger. If you would still be so mad as to bring destruction upon yourselves, if you should still neglect what you owe to God as the giver of liberty and to man as the one who trusted you with the power to preserve their liberty, you cannot plead ignorance in your excuse. Your consciences will reproach you for your folly, and your children's children will curse you.
Here, here.
Because securing liberty is not a selfish thing. It's not about us. Securing liberty is about our posterity. And I want to ask you a question that I want you to keep with for the rest of your lives. We have some people in here that are much younger than me. The rest of your lives, I hope, will be a whole lot longer. And with every action that you do from this day forward, I want you to think about this. What do you want your legacy to be? Are you happy with where we are? Are you happy with a federal government that can dictate to you what you can and cannot eat, the air that you breathe, what you can and cannot wear, where you live, what jobs you can have? Are you happy with that? Because that's our legacy and it's only getting worse. Or would you rather admit that we messed up, but we woke up, and we stood up, And we said no more. We will not comply with unlawful acts.
If I do not comply.
What do you want your legacy to be? Mercy Otis Warren said, "We will stand against tyranny today, or our children will bow tomorrow." The lesson that you've learned today is found in my new book, Sovereign Duty. We have several copies of them over there. This is Curtis Oda, the guy I told you about that took me into the legislators there in Utah to teach them. I've also taught the legislators of Kansas and Arizona. Would you like me to teach your legislators?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, all it takes is an invitation and I'll be there. In the meantime, why don't you educate a legislator? Sponsor one to have a book. We're going to do a special deal for you guys today. We asked $15 for these books. But because we want you to share them with them, this is important for them to know. We're going to do a deal. Buy two, get one free. So you can have one and then you can share two with one of your school board members, your sheriff, your city council, your county commissioner, your state legislators. Because you see, we have to educate our employees or they will continue to destroy out of their ignorance. This is how you get in touch with me. Contact me on Facebook, contact me on Twitter. My name on Twitter is just simply @KrisAnne Hall. I have a hashtag, by the way. Hashtag Liberty First. Just like that, Liberty First. I also have an ebook called In Defense of Liberty. And if you want to get my ebook for free, you can go and text on your phone, KrisAnne, my name, to 66866. Respond. It will respond back to you. You know how that works. You send them an email and we'll email you my ebook, In Defense of Liberty. It's a collection of essays on the framers' perspective on certain principles like separation of church and state, the inalienable right to life, these types of things. What the General Welfare Clause means. I also have a radio show that I broadcast, that I podcast 5 days a week. It broadcasts 6 days a week. Any of you guys know a guy named Alex Jones? His network carries me, the Genesis Communications Network carries me every Sunday. I'm the show that's on GCN before Alex on every Sunday. And so they take care of my Sunday shows, but you can listen to my podcast. I have almost 400 in the archives now. I am not a talk show where I just rant and rave and tell you everything that's wrong and complain. I am a teach show. So I take contemporary issues and turn them into constitutional trainings, just like today. Not from my perspective, but from the founders' perspectives. I have training videos, I have articles, I have all kinds of things that you can access on my website. If you can't do the text message, just go to the website and sign up for the ebook there, but do it quickly because we're going to end this very soon. This is essential. Remember I told you all the people that I teach, right? How many of you can think of at least 3 people who should have been sitting here with you today? I teach in colleges. Hey, Young Americans for Liberty here. I teach in colleges. I teach in high schools and middle schools. I teach homeschool co-ops. I teach legislators. I teach sheriff's offices. I teach citizens all over the country. And all you have to do is invite me. I have no speaking fees. Average 265 trainings in 22 states, and I don't require anybody to pay me to be there. And I don't require anybody to compensate me for my travel and my accommodations. I am not trying to get rich. I do not have a grant from the Koch brothers. I am not independently wealthy. We are a faith ministry, not a fame ministry. We have a talent that helps us gain the revenue to do what we do. We are a free market system kind of ministry as well. And we rely on the generosity of people who believe in what we're doing to support what we're doing. So it won't cost you a dime to have us come in and teach. But what's it costing our children to remain ignorant? We think $18 trillion in debt is going to be big on our kids. Wait till the debt of liberty comes due. because that won't be fixed in the ballot box. I have some other books over there as well. I have 2 books for our young people. Oops. It was just water. That teaches the history of the Constitution, the 700 years it took to write it, and founders and framers they never get to hear of. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Penelope Barker. Okay, what state am I in? And you guys don't know about Penelope Barker? Holy cow! Penelope Barker she started the second Tea Party. Just 10 months after the men threw tea in the harbor, Penelope Barker and over 50 of the colonists' women met in the home of Elizabeth King in Edenton, North Carolina, where they took a pledge. They said, "We will purchase no English-made goods until the laws that have enslaved our people are repealed." Those women were charged with treason, along with their husbands and family members as well. See, this is why our kids need to know who these people are. Yes, sir?
The Carolinas did have something similar, but instead of throwing it in the harbor, they hid it behind a false wall and said it got misplaced.
Oh, well, that's also, but I mean, that brings up a really good point. You know, the Boston Tea Party was not the only Tea Party. There were over 100 of them up and down the coast. It was a coordinated effort. So we have these books that are available, the workshop that I teach. If you would like me to come back here and teach the workshop, I don't charge anything for those either. You just have to promise me that you'll spend 6 hours with me on Saturday. If you don't want to do that, we have the 3 DVD set over there. If you, to take home with you of the workshop, it's almost 6 hours of training. It's chaptered out in about 40-minute sections. You can watch it a section at a time. You can teach a group a section at a time. You can take these DVDs and teach your groups. You don't need me to do that. I want to thank you guys for bringing me in. I want to thank you for the opportunity to teach. I have 2 favors to ask. Please go to the website and share. If you're tweeters, tweet what you learned today. Use the hashtag Liberty First. Tag me at KrisAnne Hall. Go to my Facebook page, like my Facebook page. Get your friends to like my Facebook page. It's all about liberty. And then if you pray, please pray for us. We need your prayers. We are on the road all the time. And that's not an easy life. My son is homeschooled. But he'll tell you he's not homeschooled. He's car-schooled, airplane-schooled, wherever he is schooled. And right now, apparently, he's sleeping in the back of the chair. Hey, everybody, when you see Colton, tell him happy birthday. He'll be 9 years old in 9 days.